You.
As the title of one of your books, Exploring Human Enhancement from 600 BC to 2050, suggests, human enhancement is nothing new. Humans have always used tools or substances to enhance their health, their thought, their physical strength. Why are philosophers talking about a potential future leading to transhumanism, to a future that transcends our human nature?
Well, the difference now from, let's say, the Epic of Gilgamesh back many thousands of years BC is, of course, that now it's a little bit more a realistic prospect to do something about aging. We actually got CRISPR. We actually got small molecules that seem to affect the metabolic pathways affecting aging. It actually looks like this could actually happen. While the Epic of Gilgamesh was talking about this age-old yearning, we are mortal and we do not want to be mortal. How do we explain our place in the universe? And we still, of course, need that explanation, because even if we technically and clinically can fix some of our shortcomings as humans, we still need to think about which aspects of being human actually are shortcomings, which of these changes might actually promise more than they can uphold, and what should we consider when we change ourselves in order to change ourselves into something better rather than just something different.
So you're someone who works a lot also on existential risk, big threats to the very survival of humanity. Is a transhumanist future a kind of existential threat to humanity, given that humanity as we know it will no longer really be around?
Some people think so. Francis Fukuyama famously wrote a book, Our Post-Human Future, where he threw every argument he could imagine on the wall to try to argue that human enhancement was really bad. It was risky, it would be having a lot of bad effects on society, but deep down there was this argument that it might change what it really means to be a human in such a way that it's not appropriate for humans to want to do that change. Now, transhumanism as a movement would respond by saying, no, wanting to change oneself is one of the most human things ever. That's close to the core of what it means to be a human, trying to become better, maybe failing at it, but still trying. Now, there is still a lot of risk involved in changing our inner self. You would really want to be very careful before you start modifying bodies on a large scale. We've seen in the past that many technologies overpromise. But there's also another interesting link to existential risk. Many of the earliest people who were concerned about existential threats to humanity were also transhumanists. And that might seem very strange, because aren't transhumanists these techno-optimists who think that we can solve everything with some nanomachines in the future? Why would they go on about total extinction or worse things? And the reason is, of course, if you're really optimistic about the future, you really want to get there, and you want to safeguard it and want to make sure it happens. You might also be open to radical changes. And if you can have a radical change for good, you can also perhaps have radical change for bad, for the worse. So you really want to safeguard against that. And then comes the final little cherry on top. If you're optimistic about the future, you also think that we can do something about the threats facing humanity and get to the lovely futures that might be possible. If you think the future is meh, in that case, why save it? And besides, if you think you can't actually do anything useful to improve our chances, well, why are we even talking? Maybe we should just go to the pub and drown our sorrows. Well, the transhumanist optimistic view that maybe there is something we can do and the future could become radically well is a good reason to also try to fix things like bioweapons, nuclear weapons, asteroid impacts, and trying to make sure that if we get artificial intelligence, it's safe and beneficial and aligned with our interests.
So some of the fundamental worries around human enhancement is what its impact will be, as you mentioned already, on the kind of political landscape. Will it be democratic? Will it be elitist? Will it lead to particular groups of people becoming superior beings, and while the rest of us, remain our mere mortal selves? Do you think there's a way of guaranteeing that any of these future changes will be democratic and will be distributed more widely, or will it inevitably always be a kind of elite that takes it?
I don't think elitism is given. But then again, democracy is interesting because it's open-ended. So you can never guarantee anything if it's truly an open society and a democratic choice, because people might actually choose something completely unexpected. But I do think that we can kind of shuffle the deck in a particular way, so it's more likely that you get a more egalitarian outcome or avoid some of the obvious fault modes. For example, one reason why we might see the elites having enhancement and the rest not is that enhancement is very, very expensive. Now, it turns out that turning drugs and gadgets into something cheap is relatively doable. We got mass production, the prices tend to come down exponentially, and soon the smartphones are in everybody's pocket. It's services that tend to be expensive. So if enhancements require that you need to go to an enhancement spa or you need special education, in that case, they might be a more elite thing. So we might want to work very hard on developing enhancement that are actually commodities. Conversely, we might also recognize that actually healthcare and education are in fact regarded as so good services that we subsidize them and want to ensure that everybody gets them. Sometimes things that are fairly expensive can still be seen as important for society, so we support it. I think many of these fears are that we project the standard worries about inequality onto enhancement. It's many of the worries about power and wealth inequality, but there might be other forms of inequality. Right now, for example, when we think about COVID-19 and its aftermath, it's very clear that there's some people who are resisting taking vaccines and wearing masks and might say, oh, I want a natural immunity, none of those artificial ones. They might actually be the ones that don't want to enhance themselves. We might actually get these weird slices through society, not so much the traditional elite versus the non-elite, but it might be going along other directions, which might pose tremendously weird political challenges.
There's a question about whether transhumanism is a kind of escapism, right? An attempt to sort of avoid our problems today and say that, well, there's a better future, we can create that and then we'll solve everything. When people might say, well, we do have the resources to solve these problems now and here, things like climate change, it's just a matter of will. What do you think about that?
Well, if you believe that the future is going to become better, you can be passive about it. You can just say, okay, I'm just going to wait around here in my room until the future has become glorious, and then go out and enjoy the glorious future. But that's, of course, not a very good way of dealing with it, especially since that glorious future gets designed by other people. It might actually be full of values that you don't approve of at all. If you're optimistic about the future, you want to go out and fix things. And it's an interesting situation when you look at the current problems in the world. Which of these problems could you fix using technology or social changes? Quite often, for example, people say, oh, we can't fix climate change with technological fixes. And then they promote totally unrealistic ideas, but we all need to have a joint will and make it central for our civilization and maybe accept to be poorer. Wait a minute, this is a socio-fix, just as unrealistic as saying, the nanomachines will fix it in 50 years' time. It might be possible that we can change our global mindset, but then again, I regard that as equally up to, as for argument as the nanomachines. So instead, it's interesting to look at where things coincide. And for example, many of the technologies transhumanists have been very interested in, like artificial intelligence and automation, are also very useful for fixing many of the problems in the world. If you want recycling to work, it's not just about getting people to throw the right things in the right colored bins. You actually want robots to do that recycling for you, because it will never be efficient if you leave it to people and don't pay them for it. If you really want resources to be widely available, you need to develop the biotechnologies and nanotechnologies that allow you to make them in a low energy way. And that way you also avoid the carbon emissions of making them by heating up stuff to high temperatures. There are a lot of technological things that can improve the climate situation, which we have seen, for example, when it comes to solar power and other renewables, but also plenty of interesting technology needed to make them work. Many of these ones are also, of course, of transhumanist interest. If you can make really great batteries to get the power grid to be green, good. That's also good for the cyborg implants, because I don't want to have to change batteries in my arm all the time. Ironically, one of the most transhuman or post-human things we have is the smartphone, which was developed, of course, partially for convenience, but have totally changed our mindset, our political discourse, or even way of thinking about ourselves and the landscape. So quite a lot of these technologies creep up on us.
So you've also recently been selected to the Swedish AI Advisory Board for the EU. What is a philosopher doing on an AI Advisory Board?
Well, advice, of course. One of the fun things about philosophy is that it makes you a bit of a generalist. So you might not know anything about a particular topic, but you know about how to reason about it. And in this case, some part of that advice is mostly how can the European Union have a competitive advantage of doing artificial intelligence in an ethical manner. One of the big problems is that normally you tend to regard ethics as something that's bad for your business. It's an extra cost. Maybe you can stamp ethical product on your product, and maybe that sells a little bit better. But that's it. But I think actually there is a good chance that if we manage this right, there is a chance of making artificial intelligence that is safer and better in a lot of different directions. One of the big problems with artificial intelligence is that it ideally must be value aligned with humans as it becomes more powerful. Otherwise we end up with technologies that transform the world around us, but not in a way aligned with what we want or can survive. So from my perspective, that safety is really important. From a more everyday business and political perspective, you still want products that do what people tell them. After all, we hate when our computer doesn't do what we want it to do. We want the butler robot to figure out our needs and desires, and that's already along that line. We want to figure out ways of reducing political and other biases in machine learning and monitor what we do. Here we find a lot of values that actually are aligned between both ethics and philosophy and what businesses actually can make money from and what politicians would like to say. Now, this is of course still proposals. We're telling what we're thinking to a member of a committee who might or might not be able to sway the final document, which might or might not be amended by a parliament that has various random agendas. But I think it's important as a philosopher to be participating in the public conversation, not just sit in your ivory tower saying, I know what the right thing is if anybody were ever to listen to me.
AI is often sort of vilified or often sort of exaggerated as being in competition with humanity. Again, films like Terminator, Deus Ex Machina, and so on. What is AI going to play a role, you think, in transhumanist future? Is it going to be not a kind of opposition between humanity and AI? Are the two going to cooperate in some way?
So artificial intelligence is in many ways a mirror we hold up against ourselves. Many of the fears about artificial intelligence are fears about, humans and human intention. And some of them are not unfounded. After all, if we can use automation and artificial intelligence to amplify our own abilities, that means that some people's abilities get amplified, even though the rest of us might very well want them not to. You don't want automated identity theft. You don't want dictators to be able to command a robot army that will never ever say no when they're ordered to commit atrocities. And that is just the most obvious low-hanging fruit. We might also look into situations where we get artificial intelligence helping us make much better decisions, solve fundamental, very hard problems that are beyond human ability. There are some people saying, if you can't beat them, join them. We should be kind of merging with machines, which is an old transhumanist vision. The earliest ideas about this go back actually to the writings of Bernal in the early part of the 20th century, where he's sketching out various possibilities for the future and pointing out that settling space is probably going to require us replacing parts of our biology with technology and eventually becoming partially or wholly artificial. Later on, Manfred Kleins in the 60s, looking at the real NASA space program, had similar ideas and coined the word cyborg for these integrations. Now, the problem is it's easier probably to upgrade a device than a brain. Certainly, brains have a lot of flexibility and plasticity, but it's easier to run a little update on a piece of software. So it might be that the artificial part can more easily run away and develop much further than the biological part of us. But then again, we want to have our values, the influence of artificial part. That's the key thing. After all, in some sense, our brains are kind of appendages for our spinal cord, helping the spinal cord to do the right stuff. It's just that it does a little bit more than just help the spinal cord move around in space and find food. We're thinking about food, we're feeling about food, we're thinking and reacting to other threats, we're building up internal worlds. In some sense, our brain has taken over from the spinal cord. Yet the spinal cord sets some of the initial agendas. Let's stay alive, let's function as an organism. And I think maybe what we can hope for as humanity is to become an integrated part inside, so to say, the body of whatever super civilization emerges. That might be mostly artificial, but yet we are kind of that spice that gives it soul and heart.
So you're someone who sort of puts his money where his mouth is, as it were. You've arranged for your body to be frozen after your death and, reawoken in some kind of future. If this hypothetical future were to have invented, say, a cure for death, what would you want to do with your life, knowing that, there's no end to it now? Well,
there is so much to do. The problem is, even if I knew that I could go on arbitrarily long, time is still linear. While I'm reading a good book, there are thousands of authors out there writing other good books. And there is so much research to be done that we don't know yet that we even need to do. So I think the problem is I would like to branch out. I wanted to have copies. I want to be uploaded and be able to have not just backup copies but parallel copies. Because the universe is really rich. It's much more complex than a single mind can understand. And even a collective of mind is unable to truly understand it because it's a universe containing collectives of mind making complicated art, complicated thought that is, of course, by nature just as complex as what we're thinking. So we are always going to be struggling for prioritizing of understanding and creating more. Creating art, creating games, creating new little virtual worlds, creating big virtual worlds, simulating the past, present, and future. So what I want to do, if I get an arbitrary amount of time, is, of course, adding to the universe. It's such an interesting universe, but I think we can make it even better.
A lot of philosophers have argued that our sort of mortality, our finitude, is part of what gives life meaning. People like Heidegger and thinking, even Bernard Williams in a paper called the Markopolis case. Do you think they're wrong about that? Do you think it isn't mortality that sort of gives human life its meaning?
I think it's a mistake. I think it's a bit like arguing that it's divorce that makes love have meaning. In some sense, yes, the finitude and the risk adds a particular spice and structure to it. But I think the most important aspect is that everything is in some sense mortal because eventually the proton decay or the heat death of the universe will get every form of structure there is. Very, 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 very far in the future. But if I were to live for 1 billion years or 10 years, from a Heideggerian perspective, does that matter? That perspective actually doesn't include an explicit measure of time. It's just the fact that my life is finite that matters. But that's going to be finite even if I'm a post-human who's going to live for trillions of years. I'm still going to have to face eventually that my black hole power systems are going to run out in some icy, very dark age in the far future. And in that case, I'm just as mortal as a mayfly from the perspective of infinity. But normally we care about what we fill the time with. Normally we might say that a long, rich life is better than a short, rich life because there was more rich moments, there was more other things. And I do think they add up. But different people might live very different structures of their life. There are some people who format their lives in a very different way from what I might do. And they might actually say, yeah, I don't need more than this amount of time and then I'm done. Well, I think right now, given how I'm functioning, I would just add more and more goals and we kind of get stressed. Oh no, it's only 50 trillion years until we hit the universe and I hardly started.